Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I'm Léa Benassem-Durieux, the conferences manager of COGES EVENT. The team and I are really happy to have you here so numerous again for this 12th online conference, Ideas by COGES EVENT. And I would like to thank our high-level panelists and our partner for being here with us today. And regarding the subject of the day, please note that we have respected a perfect gender equality with 3 women and 3 men. As you know now, the aim of this online conferences series, Ideas by COGES Events, is to maintain the link between the defense and security professionals. This event brings together experts, decision makers, institutional representatives, but also users and manufacturers in order to approach defense and security topics to discuss together, enrich the debates, and discover trends. As usual, the conference recording will be available, and do not hesitate to ask your question in the dedicated space on the right of your screen. We will do our best to answer them during the question and answer time at the end of the exchanges with our panelists. So this month, we had the chance to work with our partner 3AED-IHEDN, sorry, I'm going to pronounce it in French from now, on the very important topic of the ESG challenges and impacts for the defense industry. 3AED-IHEDN is an association created in 1965 that brings together professionals working in the fields of defense and security industry, armed forces officers, and professionals working for the Defense Procurement Administrations who have participated in the National Armament of Economy of Defense sessions of the Institut d'études de défense nationale, IHEDN, and of the Centre des hautes études de l'armement, in order to approach these very important issues. At the think tank, 3AED-IHEDN activities cover 4 main topics: geostrategy and sovereignty, defense economics, armament technologies and innovation, ethics and defense. So just a few words of introduction. The current European tragedy, and all our thoughts are with the Ukrainian people, has emphasized how crucial the subject we are about to discuss is. In the context of the return of a hybrid and high-intensity conflict, Europe is embarking on a rearmament process that involves modernizing its military forces and its defense industry. But between the 7 billion euro European Defense Fund and the movement towards sustainable finance, European injunctions and messages are contradictory and cause fear among manufacturers regarding the funding of their activity. Indeed, their abilities to export, to innovate, but also to attract talents could be impacted. The defense industry must be fully involved in ESG standards and not become a sector seen as separate. Above all, the defense industry must be marginalized because there can be no sustainable development without security. And now I will leave the floor to Valérie Berthaud for the moderation of this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Léa, for this very nice and interesting introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Valérie Berthaud, and I am president of the 3AED-IHEDN Association. And I have really a great pleasure to moderate this panel this morning, devoted to ESG challenges and impacts for the future of defense industry. This morning, as panelists, we have a very high-level panel, and I would like to warmly thank our panelists. And with us, we have first Dr. Amélie Ferret. Amélie is a researcher from IFRI, Institut Français des Relations Internationales. We have Thierry Geff, who is the CEO of Elno Group. We have Dominique Hall. Dominique is head of ethical business conduct at BAE Systems, and is also the former chair of International Forum on Business Ethical Conduct, IFBEC, in other words. And we have also Steve Murray. Steve is President Strategy and Marketing of Thales in United Kingdom. This morning, as said by Léa, We will cover environmental, social, and governance impacts for the future of defense industry. And since the COVID pandemic, we've said we've seen the strong attention from public on their domestic resilience, and also the people have discovered the unexpected weakness of their globalized supply chain. In addition, the current rise of high-intensity conflicts throughout the world, with the use of hybrid means and weapons, seems to completely blur the perception of a peaceful world. And today, the question of ESG is at the center of those concerns and clearly connected to the security concerns. And ESG principles currently drives issues and is clearly linked to finance private regulations, and it has an impact on defense industry. So during our panel, we will cover all these topics, and we will start with the first question: what ESG challenges defense industry is currently facing? And we will start with Dominique.
Thanks, Valerie, and good morning, everyone. As Valerie says, my name is Dominic Hall. I'm Group Head of Ethics at BAE Systems. Until recently, I was chair of IFBEC. IFBEC is effectively the Ethics Association for the defense and aerospace industry. It's where all the in-company experts get together to ensure we are following best practice, discussing the latest trends, and so forth. And it's very much my IFBEC hat I'm wearing today. I'd like to talk to you all from a kind of cross-industry perspective, combining that viewpoint with the 15 or so years that I've worked in and around the ESG area. So what I'm really hearing out of IFBEC, and particularly from US companies, is that ESG is becoming and is often the number one priority for CEOs in the defense industry. It's kind of the first thing on their desk, in that it's the issue that they are wrestling with, and it's receiving the most investor attention. It's the issue that they're struggling with. I guess the other thing I'd say is that the ESG challenges for any company haven't particularly changed in type in the last 15 or 20 years. I mean, they've refined, and the mainstream investor community has now woken up to the fact that these issues are important to people and has moved a very long way in a short period of time. It's starting to insist on companies addressing this area, which is great. Now, obviously, we've had things like GRI and DJSI and so forth for a long time. And companies have been putting in place GHG reduction targets for the last 20 years or so. But I think we're seeing this real shift to the mainstream now. And I think that's the key marker of that was the Larry Fink 2020 BlackRock letter to CEOs. And this shift is kind of bringing its own problems. One of the things that's happened with this big swing towards taking ESG much more seriously is the imposition of significant targets and requirements caused by increased general realization of the significance of this area being played back by governments, obviously our key customers, and investors. And these targets can appear often a bit arbitrary. And for a period, the investment community has been rushing to an extreme, I think. I think the clearest example of this has been on nuclear, where there's a significant impact on the ESG rating of defense companies who have an involvement with nuclear. But this rating downgrade doesn't appear to apply to non-defense sector contractors who are equally involved. We've also seen a move to sometimes adopt the most radical exclusions, the Norwegian Wealth Fund criteria, for example. There's a point to be made here about the ethics of defense, about the defense of citizens being the first duty of governments. Seeing an increase in the cost of capital when, as a company, you're helping your democratically elected government fulfill its mandate can sometimes appear perverse. Obviously, I should say that this move has been tempered very recently by the Ukraine situation, which has seen an increased awareness of the relevance and requirement for defence companies. The last specific point on this I'd like to make is around diversity, equity, and inclusion targets. It's quite easy to write off a lot of defence companies as pale, male, and stale, but there's perhaps a lack of understanding around how the employee base is structured. You can give companies targets around what the employee base should look like, ideally, and all of the companies I speak to are working on this, but it's very difficult to come up quickly with a more diverse group of, say, welders with 10 years welding experience. There's a lot of programs going on, and there will be a lot of improvements in time, but there needs to be a real understanding of the complexity here rather than just targets. So Valerie, that's my slot. Do you want to pass across to someone else?
Yes, thank you, Dominic. It's ESG topics are not so new, but they are coming more and more a serious topic, and
much more to the forefront.
Much more, and in fact, it's quite complex and it needs time. In fact, that's what I can summarize. And maybe Steve, you can give your view on how defense industry could support ESG challenges.
Yes, thank you, Valerie. So yes, Steve Murray, I'm VP Strategy and Marketing for Thales in the UK. The UK is implementing a social value procurement policy for all suppliers to government, and I'm particularly heavily involved in the implementation of that for my company, but also across industry and MOD, Ministry of Defence working group on the topic of social values. That's my interest. I think perhaps like Dominic, what we're seeing is inconsistency in terms of the investors' applications of ESG policies in defence, and there's a number of reasons for that. I think there's probably an over-reliance on third parties to do assessments of companies, and the research hasn't been standardised. So they're looking for different things in different ways, and I think those ESG assessments don't always discriminate on the types of defence-related activities that are undertaken, or also the positive environmental and social programs that companies have put in place to help deliver more social value as businesses. I think, as Dominic said, most investors agree with the principle of nuclear deterrent, but we still have this variability in terms of exclusion on the basis of companies' involvement in nuclear technologies. That said, I think it's incumbent on defence companies to be clear about their policies on key issues such as controversial weapons. In our company, we've taken a stance on that in terms of early phase out of things like white phosphorus. But I think we need to do our bit and be clear on what we are doing. On the subject of regulation, again, we've got a mixed picture. The EU has been, forward-leaning and on the public record on the green taxonomy and sustainable finance disclosure regulation and corporate sustainable reporting directives. But in the UK, for example, we haven't really got off the mark yet in terms of providing regulation. So that means that investors are also in a situation where they have to make up their own policies. So some standardisation of regulation is a thing. And as Dominic said, that does lead to share price suppression, which does impact company value and the ability to raise cash, and therefore puts sovereign defence capabilities at risk. I suppose there's a bit of an amelioration at the moment with the current crisis in Ukraine, but there's still this fundamental problem that needs to be addressed. If we kind of look at the question maybe in a different angle, and how can we in defence support ESG better, I think what we all have to remember, I guess, is that the protection offered by defence to wider society provides the foundation to make the world safer and more secure. And it's clearly not that at the moment. So if you just think about the UN Sustainable Development Goal 16, that outlines a widespread global commitment to promote peace, justice, and strong institutions, and trying to achieve the resolution of disputes non-violently, requires governments to have both military as well as diplomatic and development assistance means, and they need to be brought together in a coherent manner. So I guess military forces have always acted as a nation's insurance policy against external threats. Clearly, this role has evolved, driven by the globalization of commerce and the economic independencies between nations, which we're seeing, in terms of fuel supplies at the moment, as an example. So I guess it's obvious to say that we live in troubling times where sovereign nations are under threat, both militarily, but also in terms of critical national infrastructure through cyber attacks. We saw last year over 100 cyber attacks being launched against nations. So I guess my takeaway is that there is no sustainability without security. So without the capabilities provided by defence to counter existing, new and emerging threats, everyone's ESG aspirations will remain just aspirations. So I think if the principles of safety and security provided by defence to society are recognised as a necessary foundation, then defence and ESG are totally compatible. That'll be my thoughts, Valerie.
Thank you very much, Steve, for your input. The key takeaways: inconsistency and mixed feeling regarding regulation, and this is our next question. But the key takeaway: there is no sustainability without security, and there is a clear link between defense and ESG, and they come together. The second question, and we will start with Thierry. And the point is really about regulation. Is ESG regulation an additional burden for defense industry or an opportunity to grow?
Good morning, everybody. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to answer that for the defense industries, it's just a risk right now. It's not an opportunity. To understand the reasons why, I think we have to come back in the past, maybe 10 years ago. At that time, it was quite clear. There was a list of what so-called black countries, such as Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Cuba, North Korea, and so on. So for banks, for instance, it was very easy to support or not to support a financial operation to export weapons or simply military products. Do you sell to one of these countries or not? And for a CEO, it was also very clear. You can make business outside these countries, and it's forbidden to make business in these countries. And every year, as a matter of fact, every year, the banks used to ask us to sign a paper saying, okay, we will never try to make business with countries within the list. End of the story. But over the last decade, things change. I think everybody has in mind what happened to BNP Paribas. It's not far away. In 2014, BNP Paribas had to pay a penalty of almost $9 billion to US government for violation of embargoes to Iran, Cuba, and Sudan. And more recently, in 2018, Société Générale had to pay 1.3 billion euros of penalty to US government just for be suspected of violation, corruption to the Libyan wealth fund. Moreover, over the past few years, banks now face a risk for their reputation due to pressure coming from media, coming from social networks, coming from non-governmental organizations. You can find your name, your trademark on the front page of any newspapers because you can be suspected of black business. So because of that, the risk now for the banks is more complicated compared to the advantages. So they decided to slow down any kind of operation. So now for a CEO of a company involved in the defense industry, you never know if you will be supported by your bank for export operation. Even if you get the license coming from your government for export to be allowed to export your military products, even if the country is not in the blacklist, you can be not supported by your own bank. That's the situation right now.
Thank you, Thierry, for this. So, from your standpoint, definitely it's a risk and not an opportunity to grow. It's a risk for banks, and consequently, to get the support, the financial support for banks, for a defense industry company, it sounds very difficult, and it becomes more and more difficult. What is the view of? What is your view, Steve, on this topic?
Yes, thank you, Valerie. I mean, obviously, we're a highly regulated industry with tight controls on the sale of equipment. But I guess we've probably addressed that. I think that the opportunity may be on the growth side for this industry is the crossover in technology. So I think technology developed for the defence market also has its applications in the civil market, and so investments in defence R&D can often add back significant value to society. And I think we need to remember that. So we have very high standards in defence for certification, development, deployment. So it's an ideal proving ground for technology. So that means when it's used for non-defence purposes, usually the things that we do are not only effective but also safe, resilient, and adaptable. If you look at drones, drones started in the military market, but now moving into the civilian world. Another example is GPS. We take that for granted in our everyday lives, but the idea of using a constellation of satellites for navigation was first developed, in defence. Another example might be cybersecurity, where it's another field where the threat landscape applies equally to defence and civil sectors. So malware, respects no national nor sectoral boundary. So the solutions intended to bring security and resilience to one sector have got equal applicability to the other. And I think there are also applications of defence technologies that can help in the fight against climate change, but also create new business opportunities. So I think it's worth remembering that. We've got a good example in Thales where we're using an unmanned surface vessel that is a program between the UK and France that is an autonomous vessel that counters mines. So it takes Navy sailors out of a threat environment. Now we're now using that as a sort of mothership to enable the inspection of offshore wind farms, and using defence-derived electro-optic cameras, we can do live blade inspection of those wind farms without shutting the turbines down. We can also apply the technologies of holographic radars to mitigate the effects of turbines, which blur out, if you like, air traffic control radars. So with those sorts of technologies, we can allow more wind farms to be built in locations where they might interfere with civilian aircraft air traffic radar if they were built. So I think we need to think about the dual nature of technology in this conversation. So a firm like ours is 50-50 defence and civilian capabilities is well placed to sort of feed technology from one side of the business to the other, really. So maybe that just adds to sort of a counter view, if you like.
Thank you, Steve. I think, Dominique, you would like to say, to add a few comments.
Yeah, happy to come in on this. And I mean, Thierry, as you say, it's a risk, and yes, it's a risk. And Steve, as you say, there's upside risk there as well. And I think that's very true. I think in many places the industry has maybe been sheltering behind the sort of government contractor label, hasn't faced that level of consumer pressure that we've seen elsewhere. So there are low-hanging fruit available, and you're starting to see these come through now in measures such as obviously companies reducing their own carbon footprints, but also the reduction in the carbon intensity of their products, and those kind of applications that Steve has talked about, which have always happened, military applications coming across into sort of the civil area. I think the kind of cards on the table thing, you have to be active in this area for employee attraction and retention. I mean, it cannot be overstated among our younger populations. The brightest and the best get to pick and choose the company they work for. And among younger workers, it's clear that a strong ESG agenda is a big factor in picking which company to work for. And on the whole sort of climate change area, there's all kind of points around operational equipment performance. I mean, there may be some radical equipment redesigns to take advantage of technology in this area, the ability to charge equipment directly from electric vehicles, reduced need for diesel resupply, areas such as the RAF target of 80% of pilot training to be virtual using synthetic training solutions, solar-powered unmanned aircraft that can stay aloft for a year at a time. It's remarkable, some of the things that are being developed across the industry. But I mean, overall, in terms of outcomes and performance, there does seem to be plenty of evidence that strong performance in the ESG area correlates to strong performance overall and a stronger share price. So I really think there are opportunities for wins in this area. So thanks, Valerie.
Thank you, Dominique. In fact, we have risk on one side seen from banks and financial world, but also we have opportunities from dual technologies, but also for employee retention and the overall value of a company. Sorry. So the next question with Amélie is, what kind of contradiction do you anticipate between military operation efficiency, and ESG challenges?
Yeah, thank you very much, Valérie, and thank you for the COGES to organize this conference. I will be a bit more pessimistic, let's say, because I believe that there is, even though, of course, it can go together, the military efficiency, the military operations efficiency, and the compliance with ESG, you still find areas of friction between the two. And I think that it's important not to forget that you have friction that needs to be addressed. So first, there is a difference to make between the competitiveness or the attractiveness of the defense industry and the problem of funding the defense industry, and the military operations efficiency, because the two are not necessarily connected. So we need to think about them and to assess, to do an assessment case by case. The second point of tension that I see is, of course, the question of environment. I think that it's important to say that defense will not be green in the next coming years, even though you have, of course, some transition that is going on and some efforts that are being made, especially by the industry. For instance, Arcus did our hybrid armored vehicle, the Scarabée, which is it's a good example because it shows how hybrid vehicles can be more silent, so can add in terms of discretion and furtivity, and also in terms of autonomy, which is great. But still, you have some operation constraints that will not disappear. Just to give you an example, to have for a 2-hour flight in Mirage 2000 or for a Rafale, it's more than 6 tons of kerosene. And this, we have to say that it's a fact. Of course, you can say also that you can use, less fighter jet and use drones, for instance. But even the drones, just the rate of data, that a drone has to handle is itself consuming energy. So you have these trends of that is a very good trend because it allows you to be more targeted in terms of the use of your firepower, and therefore to adhere more to the international law constraints. But still, the more and more you put technology into military operation, more and more you need energy. So all the discussion today about collaborative combat, for instance, man-machine teaming, data storage, is a question that needs to be addressed also in terms of energy. You can find, of course, technological solutions to that, like frugal IA or for fuels, biofuels, but still in France there is actually a plan, and there is a doctrine that is being made right now about operational energy. Like, there is a document that was published by the Ministry of Armies in 2022, like a few weeks ago, about operational energy strategy, and so we have to monitor what's going on. There is another point that actually I would be more optimistic, where I think that we can progress, is of course the gender equality, where you can see that gender equality, you can add inclusivity of the military, and this is also in terms of employee extraction, even though they are not employees, they would be soldiers, but still, and you can promote the military as a social integrator. This is a point that is very important, that is very needed actually in France. And today, in the French army, you have only 15% of women, so the goal is still there. But when you look at the army that are the best in terms of gender equality, you find Israel and the US, and you can say, of course, that it's armies that are very efficient, so it is compatible. So this we have to think about it. The last thing I wanted just to say is that in terms of ESG, I think that rather than to try to put the defense into those criteria, it would be maybe more relevant to defend and to explain and to justify the uniqueness of defense, its specificity, and the fact that actually it does not necessarily has to go into those criteria. And I think that the public opinion can totally understand it. I just would like to remind you that in France, the army is one of the favorite public service of the French citizens, and this is something that needs to be said. And the military has a very good image within the population, as you can see with different polls. So yeah, I think that we should also put our effort in this way.
Thank you, Amélie. Very, very interesting. On one hand, we have opportunities of innovation with more and more technologies driving a need for more and more energy, but we have innovation to serve this with the frugal technology, frugal AI, biofuels, etc. And there is there is a trend, a heavy trend in European countries with energy operational efficiency strategy. We see that in France, but we see that also in United Kingdom and in northern countries. More than that, and I think it's very interesting to point out that military world is a social integrator. I really like this notion and the uniqueness of defense. Steve, what would you like to add on this topic?
Yes, no, thanks, Valerie. I mean, I think, Emily is right. Defence is there to defend. That's its prime purpose. But I think there are complementarities, where an environmental solution can also provide the best operational solution. So where those things come together are the areas where we kind of need to start. We've been working and been selected by NATO to provide their first certified defence cloud. Now that's a system that can be deployed in 24 hours. That previously took weeks and indeed into months to deploy. So the whole, benefit in terms of the logistics chains that can be shortened through these means are entirely compatible with a better military outcome of being deployed faster. Another example is lower fuel burn and resource consumption. So shift to electric propulsion, which is happening across land, sea, and air. But if you just look at land vehicles, shift to electric propulsion clearly reduces emissions, but it also increases operational benefit. Electric vehicles on a battlefield are more stealthy than ones with big diesel engines. So there's an operational benefit there for the military that brings them together. Another one is the use of synthetic environments and digital twins. They're increasingly being used for defence training. As Dominic said, the Air Force are trying to reduce their live training right down to 20, even 10% in the future, whether it be for training to fly an aircraft or to rehearse a mission. And so those sorts of capabilities are stopping live flying, which is stopping, emitting greenhouse gases. And also that has an affordability benefit for defence, reducing live training. So they get a better training outcome by working in that synthetic environment, and it's cheaper and it's environmentally friendly. So, those worlds are complementary, I think. Reducing size, weight, and power of systems is something that we try to do all of the time, and that means you need fewer resources to build them, to operate them, and support them. But it also brings operational benefit. Our last generation of electro-optic cameras, highly sophisticated electro-optic cameras, weighed 9 kilos. That's now down to 2.5 kilos. So carrying that around has just become a lot easier for our armed forces. But it's also consuming less energy along the way. And then I guess the last point I'll leave you on, really, which is the humanitarian support that defence provides is also positive particularly on the social side. Whether disasters are man-made or natural, what you end up with is fractured infrastructure, shortages of food and water, lack of essential services, and the military is always there to step in and support that. We've seen that time and time again over recent years. And then maybe just that recognition of the social value that defence creates, economically, environmentally, through diversity, well-being, and indeed through humanitarian assistance, I think is also a thing that we need to think about in terms of how the military operates and what it brings in terms of ESG.
Thank you, Steve. So we see again a lot of innovation serving both operational efficiency, but also ESG challenges. Now it's time to raise the question of how to fund those innovations and how to attract investors. Should we put in place new rules to better attract investors? And I will leave the floor to Thierry.
Your mic is up, Thierry.
Sorry, I said thank you, Valerie. Private investment in France. I will only talk about France because I'm not an expert of what's going on in other European countries. But but I'm sure my colleagues will focus on UK. So in France, private investment, private investors have always been very careful with the defense industry. Even in the past, for me, there are two reasons they are so careful. The first one is the fact that, investors, they like short economic cycles, which means 5 years. They have all in mind to double their investment after 5 years. Unfortunately, in the defense sector, is 5 years, it's just the beginning, okay? The cycle is more closer to maybe 10 years. And the second reason is the fact that, say that's the case in France, but same in UK, same in the US, there is some kind of veto right from the government. When you want to sell your company, for instance, you want to get retirement, and you want to sell your company, there is some kind of veto right from the French MOD to secure, of course, the investment. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. To secure the sovereignty of the country, and sustainable finance just make things worse than before. For instance, that for sustainable finance, there are 3 strictly forbidden industries: tobacco, porn, and defense at the same level. It is why in 2017 in France, the French Minister of Defense, Mrs. Florence Parly, decided to create a public wealth fund dedicated to defense industry and mainly defense startup and SME, so-called DEF Invest, and after that DEF Innov, and DEF Events was created, to secure the capital of strategic companies, strategic meaning strategic interest for the defense sector, and DEF Innov to help long-term innovation. And I would like to add, even if there is to say, nothing linked to the investment, but innovation in France for defense is very well supported by our Ministry of Defense, and I hope that will continue in the future. But I would like not to be so pessimistic. I feel now things coming better, maybe due to the situation, at the east of Europe. And anyway, I think we, companies involved in defense sector, we have to better communicate to investors and to our banks. It's not because you are working for military people that you cannot be ESG compliant. As a matter of fact, there is no relationship between ESG and defense. You can be compliant with ISO 14001. You can be compliant with ISO 26000 without any problem. I can give my testimony. I am certified ISO 14001 and 1416000. So it's possible, and it's a way to show to your investors that you care with all these problems.
Thank you, Thierry, for being more optimistic and showing that we are able to support innovation in defense, and that defense industry is able to really support ESG challenges with labels. And a question for Amélie. Do you think we need to create specific labels for defense industry, or do we need to modify current labels?
Thank you so much. So first, I just wanted to add on what Steve said earlier about how the military can also help in terms of crises that are not connected to defense issue. I think that the COVID example is a very relevant example to show how the military and the specific knowledge and experience of the military in terms of logistics, for instance, but also in terms of medicine, can be used to create or to foster the resilience of society, and not just in France, but also all over the world. For instance, in Israel, they used actually the military to be able to contain the epidemic. And I also just wanted to say something about what Thierry said in terms of exportation and the risk for investor to exportation, because the investor they refuse to fund exportation program towards countries that are not very that are considered to be problematic, even though the states said that it was okay to export to them. This it raises a huge problem in terms of democratic accountability. You see, and this is something that we should press on, because the banks, they are not accountable towards the citizen, and they are not actually, they don't have any mandate, and they are not representative of the citizen, whereas the state is. So it's problematic that the state decision in terms of exportation and what we are doing in terms of defense cooperation and policy can be countered by private actors that are not bonding to a territory. So now, sorry for just the two fingers to add to the discussion, but about the creation of a new label that includes that is specific for defense industry. Yes, I think that it would be a very important step and a very important move, especially because you have several options. But if the option is just, for instance, for the green taxonomy, the defense industry negotiated, and it's true that in the beginning we were associated with tobacco and pornography industry, but in the end it was not concerned and it was not included in the green taxonomy. But not to be included doesn't mean that you're okay. It also raised suspicion, especially towards banks. So and it's the same with ESG standard. Let's say that if we are creating a subset ESG standard just for a subset of products that are not socially harmful, what about the socially harmful products? You see, like, it's just that it validates this narrative that defense is socially harmful, and this is something that we should be very careful of. And this is why, if you create a specific defense label that promotes let's say you can create a positive defense against a negative defense, or like a ethically responsible defense, in contradiction with unresponsible defense. It would be a way to make compatible the fact that today you want your money to be monitored in terms of impact that it has on society, and it will also promote the uniqueness, as I said, about the uniqueness of defense. And what is very important, and I will just finish by that, what is very important to keep in mind is that Thierry mentioned it as well. It's true that you have today a wake-up call in terms of the need for defense within the European Union, as we saw with Germany, for instance, and it's of course all connected with Ukraine. But nothing is telling us that this is going to last. And this is why it's very important to capitalize on this specific context, where we have an opportunity or a window to promote this type of narrative, to be creative and to offer some new proposition, for instance, this defense label.
Thank you, Amélie. And in fact, my key takeaway on what has been said is actually we need to work together to better communicate towards the investors, but to communicate also towards public opinions. And we face really an uncertain world. We need really to better work together to be completely aligned. what I would like to conclude, to have from you is a word of conclusion, a short word of conclusion before the question. We will start with Dominique.
Thanks, Valerie. I mean, I guess my conclusion is that this area has really already taken too long to hit the mainstream consciousness and the mainstream analysts. And now it has. We're seeing a kind of proliferation of apparent experts and a focus on targets that are sometimes perhaps not clearly thought through at the expense of actually understanding how the business works. My view is we should focus on the data. And we, as companies, should all get more data out there explaining exactly what we're doing, less of the sort of stories and more on the data. At least things are now heading in the right direction. So,
thank you. Data-driven companies. Steve, what would be your last word?
Yeah, Valerie, thank you. I think, you know, at the heart of it, I think we need to get the message across that the protection offered by defence to wider society is what provides the foundation to make the world safer and more secure. And that takeaway line, there's no sustainability without security. That's the heart of it. Everything else has to build from that.
Thanks. More secure world. And what about you, Thierry?
As you said, Valerie, I think communication is here the key word. The defense industry must make itself better known to banks, to investors, and also to public opinions. And we cross all our fingers, and we hope that due to the global situation, defense industry will come back in the green band.
Thank you. And Amélie.
Yeah, I will just say that we can see in Europe a proliferation of norms today that can be actually quite damaging, especially for small actors that do not necessarily have the human resources to deal with all the compliance issue. And I would like to point out the fact that there is a strategic competition to define those norms and also to be bounded by them. And I think it's very important to realize that there is not just Europe in the world, that you have also other actors like China, Russia, and the US, of course, that invest into the thinking, the doctrinal thinking about normative influence. And I think that we should do it as well.
Thank you very much. I would like to warmly thank our panelists, and it's time for question and answer with the audience. So thank you for using the question area to raise your question. I leave the floor to Leah.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you to all of you for this very interesting discussion. And so regarding the question from the audience, I would like to start with Dominique. Maybe there is a question for you. Isn't that the role of reputation management agencies to cover these topics, avoiding any whitewashing accusation, at the same time in terms of internal and external communication?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I think there is a role for reputation management agencies here, clearly. And as Steve pointed out, it's making that case for defence. And there's another question around which countries defence is seen poorly in. In the US, defence is seen as a fantastic industry, very positive industry to work in, feel very proud of working in the defence industry. Whereas in Europe, we're a little more hesitant about making that case. And I think we need to make that case more strongly. In terms of reputation management agencies, I get a little worried about this. And you've seen it in the oil and gas industry. And you see all these stories about, hey, we're producing biofuels from algae and so forth. And please ignore the fact that that's actually 0.5% of our profit, and the other 99.5% comes from crude oil. So I think there's a danger in that area. I think show the data, tell the truth, make the case. That's my view.
Thank you very much, Monique. Then maybe a question for Steve and for Thierry. how do you address transparency, confidentiality issues in the case of defense R&D and ESG disclosure? Steve, you'd like to go first, maybe?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it perhaps comes back to the point about defence products are created lawfully, and therefore I think sort of we can't get into this situation, I think, that Amelie described about having sort of bad social products versus good products. I think we're all bounded by regulation. So I think the MODs of the various nations have got a role to play in this, because obviously some things are can't be disclosed publicly. I think Dominic's right. We should disclose as much as we can publicly in terms of what we're doing, and I think we're trying to do that with our investors as a group or singularly. But at the end of the day, it's the confidentiality is necessary. It's down to the MODs to manage the industry suppliers, and we follow entirely their governance, if you like, when we're creating capabilities for defence. So it can only be as transparent as it can be, respecting the needs of the governments that we serve.
Yeah, I think if you want to secure your investors, your partners, the idea, as I said before, is to go through certification. For instance, ISO 26000 certification. So as many certification, any kind, like ISO 9001, you can be compliant, you can be audited by an external company, and protect your confidentiality and secret. You can do both without any problem.
Thank you to both of you. And maybe, as we have 2 minutes left of conference, a last question for Amélie. Do you think it is feasible for the industry to agree on an ESG standard for a subset of products, group of products that is not socially harmful?
Yeah, so it's what I was saying before. Actually, I think that it might be like a fake good idea, because in the end it reinforces to accept that you have to divide subsets of products. It can be of course helpful, because distinction is always a good thing in order to better grasp what you are doing, but it can be problematic because it would entail that actually you have products that are socially harmful. Yeah, it reminds me of this debate about controversial weapons, that like the list of the banks, like where, like just creating new lists that were not actually validated by any state treaty or directive or, any type of norms, which would be the controversial weapons. And so what does it mean exactly? So a weapon, it depends also of it's either an illegal weapon, it's a legal weapon, and I think it's a bit the same for those products. And I will totally go on Dominic's line. I think that this is very important. We should not be afraid of telling the truth, and we should not be afraid of making the case to defend and to explain mostly that truth.
Thank you, Amélie. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to Valérie and for the partnership with the 3D ESG. We have respected our allocated time, so thank you for your participation, your question, and thank you to all our panelists again. That was the last online conference ideas by COGES events of the semester. For the next week, we will focus on the organization of Eurosatory 2022 and personally on the conference station that will be held during the exhibition. We will share the provisional program very soon, so stay tuned. We look forward to seeing you at Eurosatory 2022, the Defense and Security Global event at Paris-Nord-Villepinte from June 13th to 17th. Thanks again to all of you. Have a very good day. Take care and bye-bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.